Hi everyone, welcome to today's Application Ready, Get Set for September webinar. We're so excited to have you all, so thank you so much for joining. We're just going to wait a minute or two just to let as many people in as possible before we get properly started with today's session. September is fast approaching, which means application season is also coming up very shortly. So today we're going to go through everything you need to know to succeed at each stage of the application process, from actually finding the right roles for you and submitting really strong applications to crafting the very best CV and making a great impression during interviews. We hope that you will leave today feeling much more prepared for the upcoming application season. We'll have the opportunity for Q&As throughout the webinar today. So we're going to ask you to use the Q&A function that you should see at the bottom of your screen. If you click more, the three dots and more, you should then see a Q&A button. So we'll ask you to use that to ask any questions that then I will ask Ali throughout the session. Please don't use the chat function because we will be using that for other things throughout the call. And if you put your question in there, it will most definitely get lost. So please use that Q&A function for any questions that you may have about applications, CVs, interviews, or anything more generally related to applying for internships and graduate roles. Just as a very quick introduction to myself, my name is Ella and I am the member marketing manager here at Bright Network. And just for a very quick audio description as well, I'm a white female with brown hair in a ponytail and I'm wearing a white stripy top. I will now hand over to Ali, who will be hosting the main bulk of this webinar. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks, Ella. Yeah, thanks so much, and great to be joined by you all today. Really excited for today's session. So yeah, just as a quick introduction, I'm Ali. I have been working in the people and talents space, specifically in the early careers and graduate recruitment industry for about 13 years now. So have seen it all when it comes to the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of CVs, applications, interviews, etc. And then alongside that, I'm also a professional coach as well, so supporting both people in the early career and also beyond with kind of achieving personal and professional goals. As a quick audio description as well, I'm a white male with brown hair and a grey t-shirt on. So if we jump straight in to just to give a quick overview of what we're going to be covering together today. So yeah, first section is going to be on application guidance, how to decide whether you should be applying for a role in the first place or not. And then as part of that, we'll also look at where to be using AI within that process as well, whether that be ChatGPT, Claude, or whatever it might be that you're using as a personal preference, and yet how to make the most of that within the context of your applications. We'll be looking at CVs as well, what a best practice CV should be looking like. You'll hear lots of do's and don'ts from various different sources, so hoping to provide you with a kind of best practice 101 for your CV, as well as busting the kind of key myth of I don't have relevant experience or I don't have enough experience for this role. We know that can be super frustrating for graduates to see on those job adverts that they're looking for experience. So we're going to give you a quick once over on how to kind of combat that myth. And then we'll wrap up by looking at interviews, so how to approach different interview types, as well as what you should be thinking about in terms of the questions that you ask at the end of an interview. Like Ella said, as we go through each of those sections, there'll be time for Q&A as well. So please pop your questions as we go through into the Q&A section. So I think a quick poll to get us started. So we wanted to hear from you on a scale of 1 to 5. How confident do you feel in your applications currently? So I think is the poll coming up on the screen, Ella? Is that right?
People are answering it in the chat.
Fine,
Yeah.
great. So yeah, on a scale of 1 to 5. How confident do you feel? I see lots of twos and threes, kind of middling, a few zeros, a few ones, not many fours, not many fives. Just let a few more of those answers come in. A -1 even. Well, look, hopefully, the good news is wherever you are on that scale currently, hoping that in 2 hours' time you're feeling significantly further up that scale, whether that is your confidence, whether that is your preparation, whether that is just a few tips and tricks that you can take away. Definitely that is the purpose of this webinar this afternoon. So let's start off with your applications and thinking about specifically how to decide whether you should apply for a role in the first place. So it's really important first up to think about being selective, okay? You absolutely should not be applying for every and any role that you see. And just because you hear other people applying for roles doesn't mean that you should suddenly kind of jump on that bandwagon as well. It's really, really important to kind of set a precedent yourself of being selective on the roles that you apply for. A few of the reasons why: firstly, obviously it saves time. The fewer roles that you apply for, the more time you can put into those applications, and the more time you can really focus on looking for roles that fit the sort of role that you're going to be looking ideally suited to. Likelihood is, if you are being more selective, you're also going to be more likely to be applying for roles that ultimately you have a better chance of getting as well, right? Because you have an improved fit with those roles. So it works both ways. It needs to make sure that you are right for the role as well as the role being right for you. So the more selective you are, the more chances of that improved fit with you and that role. The more focus you can put into those applications. So if you're doing fewer applications, but dedicating the same total amount of time, that means you can put more time into each individual application, whether that is a cover letter, whether that is a CV, whether that is interview prep, and ultimately can help with the quality of your application. A high quality application is always more likely to help you get that role. And then last but not least, the fewer roles you apply for, the fewer roles you're going to be rejected from, the less stress you're putting onto yourself. And so the overall more positive this is going to be for your own personal well-being as well. Looking after yourself to keep that positive attitude, which really is going to be needed through this application hunt. So a few things to be asking yourself before starting that application journey. So the first one is, do I meet the role requirements, right? So it's really important that you are only applying for roles where you meet the requirements too. This is a one-way ticket to be rejected from the role pretty much immediately if you do not meet some of these requirements in the off. Okay, so first up, do I meet all of the requirements? Those might be essential logistical criteria. So, for example, a role might ask for someone who can start in September. Are you able to start in September? It might require someone who is based in London or can commute reasonably to London. Can you make that happen? It might require someone to work 40 hours a week. You might only be available 20 hours a week. So let's start off by making sure that we meet all of the essential logistical criteria with regard to the role. Secondly, let's make sure that we meet all essential skill and experience criteria. Okay, so this might be phrased as a must-have, a need-to-have, or a required. But let's make sure that if the role requires a coding language, let's say Python, or the role requires fluency in French, or the role requires Photoshop, that we have that relevant technical skill or soft skill requirement. And then last but not least, we want to meet some of the nice to have criteria. Okay, so this might be down as a beneficial or an ideally or is a plus. That might be soft skill experience or something which isn't really essential for the role, but is a bonus to help strong applications stand out. Okay, so that's useful if we stand out there, but it's not something that's an absolute must have. Secondly, does this job meet my requirements? So we mentioned this already, right? But roles are that fit to find that perfect role goes both ways. You are interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you, and you should feel empowered to feel like that. So you should also think, right, well, hang on a second, does this role meet what I'm looking for? So that might be a role in a city that I want to work in, or a salary that I would deem to be the right minimum salary for my experience, or it might be a role that represents good progression, quick career progression for me based on where I see myself going. So, or it might be an industry that I'm interested in working in. So, if you want to work in the finance industry and there is a role that sounds interesting, but it is not in the finance industry, and you've decided, I categorically want to work in the finance industry, that is what I've done my research in, then just because other interesting roles exist outside of that industry doesn't mean you should be applying for those roles. Okay, let's really hone in on what matters to you and what makes sense for your application hunt. Does the job align with my career goals? So this is really important that you're thinking in the long term and not the short term. Okay, it will stand out a mile if you are applying for the role for the sake of having a role. Okay, and I know it can feel it can feel that peer pressure. It can feel challenging. It can feel a lot of pressure to be applying for roles and secure something and have something lined up for by the time you graduate or immediately, depending on if you're a current student or a graduate already. But the reality is that will stand out. Okay, that desperation, that short-termist view on things will stand out in the interview process, and businesses will always prioritize candidates who are looking for the right long-term fit. Okay, so it's really important you think about, is this a long-term fit? That doesn't need to be a forever fit, but it needs to be something you could see yourself in for at least a year. Would this role help me develop professionally? So, is this something which makes logical sense to me to take on? Is it going to be challenging for me? Is it something that I'm going to grow from doing? Would I find this job engaging day to day? There's loads of great content out there, in particular, across lots of different channels, TikTok, Instagram, a business's own work for us or careers site, LinkedIn, where you'll be able to find day in the life content, inspiring you to understand what actually you're going to be doing in a day-to-day graduate scheme or a day-to-day the marketing role or a day-to-day of an account manager role, so you have a better understanding of what that role actually will involve. Okay, it's really sometimes easy to misinterpret things when they're written down on a job description. So actually seeing that role come to life will help you understand, is this a job that I can see myself doing for over a year, and would I enjoy that? Does the company align with my values? So is the actual company and industry a place that I would like to work and somewhere that I can really see myself being part of and contributing to as a bigger company, right? So not just the role, but actually the wider industry they operate in. So for example, there would be a difference between a marketing role for a financial services company and a marketing role for a charity. Those would be two very different industries with two very different purposes. Which of those industries would align more to your personal values and preferences when it comes to a new role? And then last, but by no means least, if I were offered the job, would I accept it? You should only be applying for roles if you can genuinely see at the end of the process, if I were offered this role, I would accept it hands down. Because if you're going into an application process just to test the waters or thinking, I'll apply for this, but I'm not really that interested, that will come across in the interview process. And chances are you won't get that role. So going through the interview process for the practice or to take away that opportunity from someone else will ultimately show, and you're less likely to get that interview, which probably will have a knock-on impact on your confidence as well. Okay, so you need to really step back and ask yourself, if I get this job, do I genuinely want it based on everything I know at the moment? Okay, of course there will be things that you learn through the interview process that you might think, actually, you know what, I came into this process genuinely thinking I would accept this role, but I've learned something that actually I've changed my mind. I've decided that it's not quite the right role for me for XYZ reason. That is totally understandable. But what you don't want to do is just apply for something for the sake of it, even if you're not actually interested in doing that role. Okay. So we start off by understanding what are the company's criteria and what are my criteria and do they match? Okay. And we should only be applying for roles where there is that good match. That will reduce the number of roles that you apply for so that you can put more effort into those applications where that is a match And ultimately, the more effort you put in, the higher your hit rate to then secure both an interview, but then also a job as well. So once we have done the actual application process, we then move on to, sorry, considered the application process, we then move on to the application process itself. So something for you to be thinking about here is Chat GPT, whether that is Chat GPT or any other generative AI. So that might be Claude, it might be OpenAI, it might be anything else that that you are using in your day to day. Where and when should you be using generative AI? So, um, we obviously speak with employers on a day-to-day basis, graduate recruiters, early careers talent professionals on a day-to-day basis at Bright Network, and they are absolutely swamped with applications. Okay, the quantity of applications that they are receiving is at an all-time high, partly due to generative AI and ChatGPT, okay, is enabling students and graduates to apply en masse for roles. However, it is really, really easy for those employers to spot a ChatGPT generated answer or CV like that. And this is speaking from someone who does this on a day-to-day basis, right? My role is looking through application answers, looking through CVs. I can tell probably within 5 to 10 seconds whether something has been written by ChatGPT or not. Okay. What's even more is on our application form, we have a box which says, please confirm that you have not used ChatGPT to generate any of these answers. So we then ask people to then attest to the fact that they haven't used it. And people will often say, yes, I confirm I haven't used it, but will then put in a copy paste ChatGPT answer. Okay. So it's really, really simple for us to tell. And if someone says that if someone has generated a copy paste ChatGPT answer or lied about their use of it, that is an immediate no. Okay, there is no further discussion of your CV or application or its merits, purely down to the volume that we're looking at. Okay, so that honesty and that copy paste integrity means an immediate no. And I know that's hard to hear, but the way around that is to use ChatGPT effectively and appropriately and not copy paste, and also to always demonstrate integrity with your answers as well. Okay, so there are some telltale signs for you to be that we'll be looking out for, both employer, whether that's employer, whether that's me, whether that's a hiring manager. So if it's an application answer, often the answers are split into paragraphs. Whereas if someone is typing an answer directly into a application form, you're very unlikely to use paragraphs. But if you're copying and pasting it from ChatGPT, it's likely split into paragraphs, and those paragraphs will mimic a kind of essay format. So they will pretty much always start with a adverb or a kind of a phrase like firstly, secondly, ultimately, additionally, furthermore, in conclusion. In conclusion is quite an odd term to use in a cover letter or an application. So we will see those in exactly the same kind of structure to sentences over and over again. There'll be a lot of very generic and robotic tone of voice through the messaging, and that tone of voice might not match up with your tone of writing on your CV, which again is a really obvious one. Things to watch out for on your tone of voice might be Americanisms. So American spelling versus British spelling. If you are applying for a UK-based role and expected to write in British English, then ChatGPT will very often um, uh, put together content that's in US English. So that's one to watch out for. M dashes versus N dashes, very, very niche difference there, but that is a telltale sign. So in typical Microsoft Word or any normal keyboard, an M dash, which is a longer dash, does not exist. Okay, so you cannot generate a M dash on Microsoft Word just by typing normally. The only way you can generate that is by copying and pasting it from ChatGPT. Okay, so again, if your dashes, your hyphens are incorrect, your grammar is incorrect, that is a telltale sign for us as well. And use of the same filler. So, for example, why would you like to work at Bright Network? is a application question that is part of the application process for a role at Bright Network. We have roles live on the website currently right now that you could apply for, where that is a question, and we will ChatGPT will generate the same reasons, probably the same quite unpersonal reasons as to why. Okay, so it'll be the same themes and content, and I know that. Okay, so for example, it will talk about social impact. It will talk about diversity and inclusion. It will talk about key things that are on the job advert, but in the same way, without you drawing in any of your personal connection to those reasons. Okay, so I know that Bright Network is doing fantastic things, right, in the social impact space. What that means to you, I'm more interested in. Okay, so the chat GPT can answer why social impact and why social mobility are really important things. What it can't do is translate as to why that's important to you, and that will be missing from that ChatGPT generated application answer. However, there are things that you can do. There are appropriate ways that you can use ChatGPT. For example, you could ask to provide you with a structure or some guidance on a structure that you could then use. You could ask it to proofread your work. You could ask it to provide you with a summary of some key areas to research a company before applying. Those would all be tools that would inevitably help improve your job application, help save you time, and be efficient with that time without ultimately doing your work for you, right? So it should never, ever be a replacement tool. It should always be something that enhances or supports the work that you're already doing. Some do's, some don'ts, and some definitely do nots for ChatGPT. Then, so yeah, definitely help it help it to review drafts, to summarize content, to abbreviate content. Let's say you need to hit a 300 word count and you're actually at 500 words. Right, ChatGPT, could you help me abbreviate this word count, this paragraph to reduce it to a word count? Or hey, ChatGPT, could you provide me with 5 key reasons why someone typically is interested in working at X company, so I can think about fleshing those out myself. Don't ask ChatGPT to draft your answer for you, and definitely don't copy and paste anything without thoroughly reading it in first. So you would be surprised how many times we will review an application and it will contain the response from ChatGPT. So it will say that the application answer will start with, "Thanks for your query. I've drafted the following cover letter for you to apply to X role." Okay, so someone clearly hasn't read the answer. So that, again, is an immediate no. It doesn't matter what the rest of your application is. If you are copying and pasting, that is always going to result in an immediate no. Some do's and don'ts for your CVs. So on, yeah, you can always support with structure for a baseline CV. So for example, you might say, "Here's my CV. I'm applying for X role. Can you help me identify where I could highlight relevant experience and ensure it aligns with the job description?" Definitely don't ask AI to create a CV for you. Let it exaggerate your experience, which it will often do, right? So if you say, "Hey, can you help me tailor the CV to get this role?" It might say, "You need X experience in this role. Shall I add that in?" But it might not actually be something that you've done. Okay, so let's make sure we're never exaggerating. And again, let's never, ever, ever submit anything without first proofreading it and fact checking first. And then the final one here is do use AI as a helpful tool and not a replacement for your own work. So we've covered that already, but it's things like proofreading, it's things like fact checking, it's things like research, it's things like word counts that we can help with to enhance our existing work. But what we don't want to do is generate that answer on our behalf. And then on the don'ts, share any information with AI tools as inputs that you'd rather remain private. So for example, anything on your personal CV that you would rather remain private, that might be your CV, that might be contact details, etc. And then definitely don't ever pay for AI tools to make your CV for you. There is enough great content out there in terms of CV templates that you can get from Bright Network, from even Microsoft Word itself has a CV template built into it. So those CV templates are more than suffice. You should never be kind of paying to get that level of support. So that is the first section on applications and ChatGPT. So we're going to pause here and just take a time to ask any questions that have come through specifically about submitting applications.
Yes, and thank you for everyone who has left questions so far. If you do want to ask questions, just make sure you use that Q&A function. And I'm kind of going through and making notes on the most asked questions so that we can kind of get through as many questions as we possibly can. Ali, a question that's come up quite a lot is to do with how to make applications feel more human so that they don't feel too like AI without them being too informal at the same time. I think a few people have said that they naturally use words like furthermore or additionally when they're writing their answers. So yeah, do you have any advice for how to make something sound kind of human and genuine whilst also still being like in the person's tone of voice and not being too informal?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I think 2 points there. One is there is a difference between business communication and professional communication and academic communication. Okay, so the way that you learn to structure a letter, sorry, an essay at university is different to the business style communication that's expected from you in the working world. Okay, so the first one is just doing your own research independently, and this could be asking, looking at communications that you get in marketing emails that you might be subscribed to, or asking a friend or family to just see examples of business communications. Obviously, that nothing confidential, but just examples of how they might communicate in a business context, and trying to identify yourself what some of the differences are. Because how I write now is very different to how I wrote at university, right? 15 years ago. So learning those adjustments to yourself so that you can start to find that tone of voice balance, I think is the best one. And look, if you don't know anyone who works in a business setting, that does not stop you from being able to access that sort of information. Okay, so you could even ask ChatGPT for examples or of the differences between academic writing and business writing to help you with that tone of voice so that you can strike that balance between being professional and but not being too unprofessional. And then the other one is, I think what ChatGPT can never do is tell me your experience. Okay, and and by that I don't mean where you worked or where you went to university, but what was your lived experience? How did that make you feel? Right? What made you feel impassioned about a certain subject? Why did you choose to study X degree subject? What was it that you found particularly interesting? Okay, that lived and personalized experience is something that I just can't I can't replicate via ChatGPT, and you can't expect it to either. Okay, so drawing on, right, I'm interested in working for X company. I love that you're in Y industry. That's particularly interesting to me because you've been to an event and you saw someone speak on that topic, or you have read around the subject, or you did some work experience that you found particularly interesting, whatever that might be. Okay, tell me your personal experience. Don't just tell me what a company does. Okay, I know that what Bright Network works in the early career space. You don't tell me that, right? In application answer, what I need to know from you is why that is empowering, interesting, exciting for you.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great advice. Thank you, Ali. We've had another question here about the differences between applying at bigger, medium, and smaller companies. Is there anything that you should kind of change about your application based on the size of the company you're applying for?
Good question. So look, the obvious one is the larger the company, the more applications they're going to be receiving, probably. And obviously that slightly depends on roles, more niche roles that have more kind of specific skill requirements may obviously still then have few applicants, but in general, I would say the larger the company, the more applications. And so two things. One, you maybe need to stand out more, but at the same time, there are probably more likely certain things you need to tick in a box to demonstrate. Okay, so I would assume that the hiring process for a large enterprise graduate scheme is much more structured and box ticky than in a small startup environment or in a an early scale business. And so in order to progress to the next stage of the application process, you may need to tick 3 out of 5 boxes or 3 out of 4 boxes. And if you don't, that might be an automatic rejection, right? Whereas in an early create a smaller business, they might actually be able to demonstrate more flexibility around what they see because they really like the cover letter, right? Or you designed a CV in a really creative format that they really liked. So I would say, yeah, for a larger company, there you've got to strike that balance of yes, wanting to stand out more, but you've got to do that in a structured way. And often I think that actually the CVs and the cover letters, I would generally say that that try too much to stand out are often the ones that actually end up backfiring very slightly because you make it hard for the person reviewing the application to access the information they need. Okay, so I think just remember that whatever you're doing to stand out, is this still easily digestible and easily understandable for the person on the other end of the computer screen who's reviewing this information.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Ali. Um, we've had someone ask, do you have any advice for people reapplying to roles after failing an application previously at the same company?
Um, Good question. I guess first question is how much did you really want this role to make it worth reapplying? Okay, because that role is probably not any less competitive the second time around. So back to being selective, review those criteria. Do I meet all the essential skills? Do I meet all the logistical criteria? Does this role meet my criteria? Right? Do I really want this role? If it doesn't meet those, then don't reapply. Okay, because we really want to emphasize that selectiveness in our own choices because that rejection is hard. Okay, it takes its toll. So let's really be picky ourselves and challenge yourself. Right? Do I really think I've got the uh, that I meet enough criteria in order to warrant applying for a second time round? If you are applying for the second time round, then what could you be doing differently? I think an element of self-reflection on your own is really important. So I think you've got to pause and say, well, look, something's got to be fairly different here because I didn't get the role the first time around. Okay, so something's got to be fairly different the second time I apply, and almost thinking about starting from scratch rather than just a couple of small tweaks to my CV. And if you are committed to putting in the effort to restarting from scratch, then that is probably a good sign that yes, it is worth reapplying for that role. But if that process sounds too hard, that is probably your sign that you don't actually want the role enough anyway, and therefore it's not the right fit and isn't worth applying for.
Yeah, great. I think we've probably got time for one more question before we go on to the next section of this session. So we've had quite a few people ask about like how employers are using AI during applications. Obviously, you can't speak for all employers on how they're using AI, but do you have any like insights that you could share surrounding that? And then kind of, I guess, second part to this question is there's been a few questions surrounding like I think you mentioned that when applying for Bright Network, there's a tick box to say like I haven't used AI in my application, for example. If there's the same thing on for a different role at a different company, do you recommend people like being super honest about like how they've used AI? If they have used AI, should they say? Yeah, do you have any general guidance around that?
Yeah, good question. So, um, sorry, I've got the second question. Can you remind me of the first one?
So we've had quite a few questions about how employers are using AI during applications, getting through ATS systems and stuff like that. Yeah, do you have any advice surrounding that?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of employers will actually put somewhere on their either job advert or interview communications upfront how AI is being used within the recruitment process. So, for example, I saw recently on a interview confirmation email that the in kind of at the bottom of the email it said we used AI to create interview transcripts for all of our interviews. What that means is the interviewer can focus fully on you and listening to you, so they don't have to take notes during the interview. So they were upfront and communicative around how AI was being used in the interview process, and a lot of businesses will be sharing that information. It might not be on the job advert itself because it might not be at that point in time where they're using AI in the process. It might be further through the interview process that they start to make that information clear to you. But yeah, you should be able to find a lot of that information company to company, an application to application in some form of correspondence. Where have I seen it be used? So I've seen it be used on yeah, interview note taking. I've seen it be used for scheduling interviews as well. So there's a lot of kind of ATSs, applicant tracking systems that will help with that scheduling process and candidate communications during the interview process. Um, and then it also be used as part of a first round conversational interview as well, right? So that's something that Bright Network offers, is a conversational tool that businesses will be using to conduct that first round interview for candidates. There are laws in place around automated decision making, which means that a business should never be automatically rejecting a candidate purely on the basis of AI. Okay. So there should be some degree of human involvement in that decision. So I don't want everyone panicking suddenly that AI runs the screening process and that no humans are ever going to review this information. AI may categorize candidate applications. AI may uh, provide summaries, etc., for interviewers. But ultimately, it will be the interviewer or someone at the company who ultimately makes the final decision. And then on ChatGPT itself, look, you've got to be honest as to if you're using ChatGPT in the application process. I think the wording we used was something along the lines of, I confirm I haven't used ChatGPT to write the answers above, and there's obviously a difference between writing and proofreading, or writing and researching, or writing and fact checking, etc. So if you are um, not able to genuinely, with integrity answer that question, then then you've gone wrong, because if you upload a ChatGPT generated application, it will get rejected because it will be obvious. So I think a good example is we last summer, I think we were hiring for an events marketing intern to join our events team for the summer. And we one of the application questions was, tell us about a marketing campaign that you've seen recently that particularly interested you, and what did you find particularly interesting about the campaign? We saw lots of okay answers, some good answers, and then a really good answer about, I think the example was Coca-Cola. Um, and then we saw someone else answer with Coca-Cola. And then we saw someone else answer with Coca-Cola. And the answers were exactly the same. Okay, so you might think, well, maybe I'll just change a few words, but ultimately the actual meat of the answer, 80% of the answer, was identical. And so that's 10% of applications, which are immediately obvious to us. If the person has picked Coca-Cola, it's a ChatGPT generated application. Okay. And so that is how it's so easy. So if you are submitting an application and you think, oh, I'm not sure about whether I should say yes or no here, the answer is you shouldn't be submitting whatever you submitted because you've used AI too much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good example of like how AI is used and how it's kind of really easy to sometimes spot during applications. I think for now it's probably best if we move on to the next section. And we still have lots of questions, and some will be really relevant for other parts of this session. So some of your questions will be answered as we kind of keep going. But yeah, maybe it's time now if we move on to the CV part of this webinar.
Great. So yes, as Ella says, moving on to crafting a compelling CV. So, what's wrong with the CV? Let's start off with just some opinions. If you want to write your answers in the chat, share any thoughts as you start to read and skim this. What are your initial thoughts as to things that are wrong with this CV? Yeah, grammar, that's one. Aside from grammar, what else? Yeah, informal writing, no dates, layout, bullet points, poor structure, nothing stands out, more descriptive rather than factual, paragraphs, hard to read. Exactly. So let's start from the top with a few thoughts because all of those thoughts are bang on. So firstly, having everything in bold means nothing stands out. Okay, so your CV should be, someone reading your CV should be able to find any piece of information they want within 10 seconds. Okay, and what that needs is effective heading, subheading, and structure. So use underlining, bold, etc. to make that happen. And then let's also avoid paragraphs, which a lot of you have said as well, and make sure that we're bulleting succinct sentences rather than long paragraphs as well. A grammar check and a spelling check, of course, and an overall tone of voice check. So we've already talked about the use of kind of professional writing versus as sounding too personal. Let's just make sure that that is something that ChatGPT could perfectly provide. Right? Is, hey ChatGPT, here's my CV. Can you provide me some feedback on this CV, or could you adjust the tone of voice to a more professional business setting? Those would be perfect things that you could use ChatGPT for, right? And I wouldn't object to that use at all. Education, work experience, and skills should all be bulleted and dated and factual rather than with headlines rather than with sentences. Yep. So rather than I went to the University of Essex and studied mathematics and have graduated with a first, we're simple as on one line, University of Essex, mathematics, first class. That is one line. Um, exactly the same. The sixth form you went to, AAB, maths, English, and physics. As simple as that. Um, on the skills and hobbies and interests section, so I like to think of this as, people often ask me, what should I include and what should not include, and how do I know where to draw the line? You should read your CV, and every single word on that CV should provide you should be something that's going to help you get this job. Okay, and if you read it and you think, I don't understand why that particular thing is going to help me get this job, then remove it. Okay, so always make sure that everything that you every single word on that CV is part of your ticket to get you a job. There's loads of other great examples and things that that have come up in the chat here. A couple of things I wanted to call out in particular. So one says references. You do not need to put references on a CV. I should also is say, do not put references on a CV. Do not even say references are available on request because that is space used up that you don't need to use up, and references are always available on request because that will be part of the interview process. Okay, so that is it's wasting space. So don't use that. The other thing is, should you put the company and role you're applying for on the CV? No, not necessarily and explicitly, but if you can tailor the CV to be obviously prepared for that company and role, that would be great. So, for example, in the personal summary, university first class mathematics graduate applying for entry level analyst roles within the finance industry. That would be appropriate if you were applying for an analyst role in the finance industry. However, if you are going to do that, then let's make sure and be hot on this that we are tailoring that personal summary and not just copying and pasting it and missing it out as well. Volunteering work, achievements, scholarships, awards, professional certifications, all of those sound great. I can see all of those coming in the chat. Exactly, great examples of things that should be that you should include. If they help you, if they are relevant. Okay, what I don't want to see is something your grade ones, your year 3 swimming certificate that you got in. Okay, so just try and let's make sure that yes, we're including those things to bolster your application and showcase your diversity of achievements. But let's try not to put everything in for the sake of putting everything in, and that hopefully that's the fine line. Everything is on the table, but not everything should be included, and hopefully that makes sense. What else? I'm just making sure we're covering off kind of some of the key points. There'll be a Q&A section specifically on CVs that will come to you. So I'll leave kind of for the moment. But there's some great questions still coming through on the chat. So please do keep sending those through, and we can make sure we cover those off as well because lots of useful points as well. So what should be included on your CV? Contact details, a personal statement, education, work experience, skills and achievements, always in that order. Okay? As a graduate or in your early careers, put your education first above your work experience. There will become a point in your career where you progress to after 1 or 2 years beyond graduating, where it makes sense to swap education and work experience. Currently, this is the order that information should be structured on your CV. You want to keep it simple and avoid cramming too much into your CV. So, for example, this is where I mentioned before, everything is on the table. It does not mean everything should be included, right? So, for example, some of you might choose to draw on lots of voluntary experience because it's really relevant for the role that you're applying for. Some of you might have done voluntary experience and decide, actually, I've got other stuff that means I don't need to include that voluntary experience because I've got some other paid work experience that I think is more relevant, fills the space I need to, and so I'm choosing not to. Okay, and that is a choice that you are making. Keep your CV to 1 page. If you only listen to one piece of advice today, this is it. Okay, so I'm just going to pause for a second so this can sink in. If you only listen to one piece of advice today, let this one be it. Aim to keep your CV to around 1 page, right? I am 35 years old. I've been working for 15 years. My CV is 1 page. Okay, if I can do it, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way, but you all can too. Okay, and I promise you, having looked at probably, definitely over 1,000 CVs in my life, probably, dare I say 10,000? Definitely more than 10,000, in fact. I don't even know how to start quantifying these CVs. The best CVs I've always seen are always 1 page. And I mean that from the top, like from the bottom of my heart, that you do not need to have anything longer than 1 page. And if you do, then that is your sign that too much information is on the CV and you should take some things off. You don't need a photo, definitely not. It is a reason for potential discrimination, and there's no reason why a business should require a photo. And yeah, always remember that the file name is saved professionally as well. So, for example, James Smith CV, Ali Monk CV 2026, etc. Always save it and send it as a PDF, never as a Word document, because if you are saving it on a Word document and you send it to someone who uses a Mac, that is going to open differently. Likewise, if you prepare it on a Mac and you send it to a PC user, that might open differently to what you intended to. Okay, so let's make sure we're always saving it as a PDF and sending it as a PDF too. So if we go into each of those sections very briefly as well. So contact details, this is all you should be including for your contact details. You don't need your full address. Definitely don't include your full address. Definitely don't include your date of birth or your age. Definitely don't include your national insurance number. That's something else that I've often seen on a CV. All of those things are things that in the past may have been, and by in the past, I mean 15, 20, 25 years ago, things that would be standard to include on a CV. So the reason I emphasize this point is if we're asking our parents for advice, they may say, oh, when I prepared my CV, I would have put X on it. But things have changed. Okay, data privacy laws have changed, best practices have changed, GDPR has changed, discrimination laws have changed. So things like your date of birth, your full address, your national insurance number, none of that should be included. This is kind of the bare essential that you should be doing. It is great if you can link to your LinkedIn profile as well. If you're doing that, make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date and professional as well. A personal statement should be short, 70 words or less. A quick summary highlighting who you are, what you can offer that is directly relevant to the role and that you're applying for. Yeah, so this is a good example. I'm a recent graduate with a bachelor's degree in maths from the University of Essex, eager to begin my career in X industry. And then a very succinct summary highlighting some of your key skills, and make sure that if you're doing that, the key skills highlighted here are relevant to and tie back to the job advert as well. The next section was education. So yeah, your degree is obviously the most recent. So university and degree subject, bulleted, not as a sentence. You can add your modules if your modules are relevant. Okay, where might this be relevant? Law. If you're applying for a law firm and you are specializing in a certain type of law and you have done modules on those certain types of law, that may be relevant. If you do a broad business management degree and you are applying for a more specific specialism, for example, accounting or marketing, and you want to highlight that you have participated in those modules, or anything that is slightly more vocational, for example, accounting would be a good one. What else? But anything that is a more broad degree subject where the module does not directly correlate to something that you are then doing in that role should not be included, right? So I studied French and Spanish. I did modules in Latin American politics and history, Cubism in France in the 1900s, translation modules, etc. None of that is relevant to working in people and talent in a non-French and Spanish role, and therefore I should not be including that information on my CV. A levels or BTEC qualifications, again, just a subject and grade, as simple as that. And then if you have space, GCSEs, that could be something that you drop out. You could just put the actual number results. I have to remember it's numbers now, not letters. You could put the number results but not list all of the subjects, because listing all the subjects may not be relevant. Work experience. So yeah, always in chronological order. Reverse chronological order, which means starting with the most recent work that you are doing. The company name, the dates you worked there, the job title, and 2 to 5 bullet points on your responsibilities and achievements. Okay? Any more than that, that is too much. I'm not going to read it. Okay, any more than that, I'm not going to read it. Um, Talking in statistics as best as possible. So numbers are really important. So can you, for example, if you worked in a retail role, rather than just saying I delivered great customer service, is there a customer satisfaction score that your team, that either you personally or your team contributed to, that you could quote there? So, for example, supporting a team satisfaction score of 9.7 out of 10, that would be a great way to evidence that customer service skill, even if it's more of a soft skill. And really making sure that we're drawing on as much breadth of experience as possible. Don't just feel that you're only meant to apply with relevant industry experience. Drawing from different areas of life and work experience that you've done is a great way to bolster that CV. And then final section is on your skills and achievements. So yeah, both technical and personal skills. So yeah, be honest. Don't lie about anything or having a skill that you don't have. You could very easily be caught out on this. Languages is a big one, right? So people often exaggerate the degree of their fluency on their CV. How do you know that someone who interviews you in the process is not going to speak that language? Okay, so let's make sure that we're always honest with any skills that we have. Still keep these in bullet points. Still keep this writing as succinct as possible. And yeah, you can see a really easy example, really effective example of this on the right hand side that demonstrates what the skill is and how it's been applied. Um, there's a big myth going on, and I know there are lots of job adverts out there that will be tailored to graduates, tailored to early careers people, and then say that we need X amount of experience, right? Which can be really, really frustrating. But it's really important that if that is the case, then we put our best cards on the table and best fit first with the experience that we have got. Okay, so no, you may not have corporate work experience, but that does not mean that you don't have relevant or suitable experience. Okay, so let's talk about what we can do in those scenarios. What we really, really want to be emphasizing is those transferable skills. Okay, so if that is outside of your preferred industry that you're applying to, then that is how we can still stand out and demonstrate that we can take on those roles as well. So they might be customer facing experience in a supermarket. That has helped you develop strong communication skills, the ability to multitask, customer facing, spontaneous problem solving experience. Or it might be that you've got experience as part of a society rather than in a corporate role. Again, that might be going above and beyond as a great team player. That might be that you were treasurer, so you might have finance experience. It might be that you were social media manager, and therefore you've got marketing experience. You might have been running events for that society, where you gain project management experience and event management experience. So there's loads of experience outside of that corporate industry specific experience that you can still be drawing on. Okay. And then, yeah, last but not least, you've got a quick CV template here, which is BN approved, or just let this hang on the screen for a moment if you want to scan the QR code to download this CV template. But this will highlight exactly that structure that you want. Key details at the top, personal statement, education, employment history, and then skills and achievements. And you can see how it's bulleted to help you find that information really easily. You can see where the dates would go, the names would go, the job titles would go. That again makes it really easy to find that information in a really quick and effective way. Just going to let that hang on the screen for a few more seconds, just in case anyone else wants to scan that QR code. And if we're done, yeah, before we move on to questions for me on that section, this is a question for all of you, which is, what are you going to do to improve your CV now? So Ella, do you want people to pop that in the chat again?
Yeah.
Yeah, fab. So yeah, pop that answer in the chat. What are you going to do now to improve your CV? What's the first thing, having taken all of that away, that you're going to do? I'm delighted to see lots of people referencing that they're going to take it down to one page. I think a one page CV that, if done correctly, there's nothing more impressive than someone who can demonstrate the ability to get the information across that they want to really effectively. And that concise business communication writing is really important as well. So yeah, loving that one coming in. Adding in where you've used the skills, I like that one as well, especially if you're applying to maybe more technical roles or roles where those skills are a bit more needed. So that might be Excel, that might be a coding language, that might be Canva or some kind of Photoshop for a marketing role. Lots of people may put that they've done that, used that skill. So where have you actually applied that skill? Um, what else am I seeing? Adding a LinkedIn URL. Yep. Make it a PDF. Yes. Love that. Adding in a personal statement. Yes. Lots of great examples. Fantastic. So over to you now, which is to hear from you any questions that you may have on the CV section.
Yeah, great. We've had loads of questions come in. And guys, just another reminder, please don't use the chat for questions. I just won't choose them because there's too many to go through. So if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A function instead of the chat. Thank you. So to start off with, Ali, we have had a lot of questions to do with like length of CV, how to cut it down, and yeah, what to include, what not to include. I think after you obviously mentioned keeping your CV to one page, if people are really, really struggling to cut down their CV and make it shorter, like what would you recommend them looking at first? Is there like a particular section they should look at shortening? Do you have any advice for yeah, how you can kind of make all of the experience that they feel is relevant kind of fit in?
Yeah, so a sneaky tactic is actually clicking on the margins and broadening the margins. So that's a very sneaky answer. That will help you fit more words onto that one page if your margins are slightly broader rather than the kind of narrow default that Microsoft Word will often start with. Aside from that, a few tips and tip tricks. So one is actually stepping away from the CV, right, and actually just gaining a little bit of perspective from it. So it might be that you spent hours and hours trying to, and you just can't work out what else you could possibly remove. Just give it a break. Yeah, look at something else, do something totally unconnected to your CV, and then come back to it. A fresh pair of eyes often helps with any proofreading or reviewing of any documents. That I'd highly recommend. Likewise, asking a friend or family member what you could review or remove, and looking back at the job advert and highlighting on the CV where things are connected to the requirements. You can then look at the end, right? Well, what haven't I highlighted on my CV? That's not connected to a requirement, so should it be there? Okay, and it might be something that you keep on your CV for another application, but it might not make sense for this particular role. Okay, so for example, um, what might there might be a role that you're applying for a charity, and you have done some voluntary work for a similar charity, right? You've got enough corporate experience that qualifies you for the role. So but you've also included the voluntary work purely to indicate the link to the charity. If you're then applying for a different role at a different business, which has no connection to the charity world, you might not include that connection to that charity because it might not be as relevant for you. So that's a good example where the same thing shouldn't be included on every single version of your CV.
Great, that's really great advice. And we've had a few more questions as well around like, I know you've mentioned that stats are your best friend, include numbers and things like that. But we've had a few questions as well around like what tense people should be writing in, like the sort of language they should be using. Don't know if you have any advice on that as well.
Yeah, good question. I think there is a niche balance between that isn't either first or third person, right? And this is personal, but my personal preference would be when you're writing those bullet points, for example, um, rather than saying Alexander demonstrated fantastic interpersonal skills, blah, 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 blah. And likewise, I also wouldn't write I demonstrated fantastic interpersonal skills. Da, 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 da. I would probably just write developed fantastic interpersonal skills, right? So you're kind of neither first nor third person when you're bullet pointing it. In the actual personal statement, I would probably go for first person. I'm a recent graduate applying for roles X. But I don't think that is going to be the deal breaker, if I'm totally honest. So don't spend time kind of overthinking that too much because I don't necessarily think that's the deal breaker. The kind of bullet pointed developed without I or he or they or she or whatever actually just makes it more succinct and more concise, which helps with that word count as well.
Yeah, amazing, great. We've had a few questions as well around like certificates and online courses and whether you should include those on your CV or not, and if you don't have room, where should you put them instead? Should they go under education? Should they not? Do you have any, yeah, general advice on, yeah, if you should include certificates, and if so, where?
I would say if the certificate is a industry recognized qualification, that should go in your e- education section. For example, as part of a finance graduate scheme, you may become a qualified accountant. That would be a um, long-term industry recognized accounting qualification, and that would make sense to be in your education section. If the certificate is a online certification in digital marketing that you participated in for a week, that is a fantastic thing to do and a fantastic thing to include, but put it in your skills and achievements section.
Great, perfect, thank you. Someone's asked for more creative roles. Do you recommend having a more heavily designed CV or keeping it simple?
Um, if graphic design is a requirement for the role, that is an option. My personal preference would be keeping it simple is still good, but you just have to remember that you're opening yourself up to more creative critique, the more creativity you demonstrate in the CV. So if the actual design of the CV is not good enough, then that is another reason why you may be rejected, which wouldn't have been the case had the CV simply just been a standard black and white document format. So yes, that is another way that you can demonstrate create that you do meet the criteria, but it's also another way that you can demonstrate you don't meet the criteria. So it's just worth remembering that and being wary of that.
Great. And we've also had quite a few questions around should people be putting hobbies and interests on their CV?
Absolutely, hobbies and interests I think can fall in that skills and achievement section, um, if relevant and interesting. So I think we in that example CV we had before. I think the example of an interest was or hobby was going out for dinner. That wouldn't be something to include in your CV. But if your hobby is um, uh, it might be competitive marathon running, and that demonstrates resilience and the ability to work under pressure. That's great because it's something that could be relevant for a role that requires those soft skills as well. So yes, but that could also be something which would be the first thing to go if you're running out of space. Yeah. So just think critically to yourself: is that hobby going to get me the job? If it's not going to get me the job, take it away.
Yeah, that's really good advice. We've also had a few people asking, I think you mentioned during the slides to include things like your A-level results, if there is room, potentially GCSE as well. People are asking if they've kind of got lower A-level results than they would have liked. and maybe, they've gone to uni and now they're on track for a first or a 2-1 or something like that. Do you recommend still including the grades of your A levels, even if you're maybe not like entirely happy with what you achieved?
Good question. I think we enter the world of subjectivity here, right? In that there's not a one size fits all answer to this. That because some employers are going to look at that and say, well, the A levels aren't there. There's something to hide, right? And it may be that actually they assume that your grades are worse than they are, right? So you may not be happy with those grades, but they may be perfectly good grades, right? Um, And there may be other employers who don't even bat an eyelid and see that you're on track for a 2-1, have already secured a 2-1, and so they don't bat an eyelid. And so that is subjective. My personal recommendation would always be that honesty and integrity is better. Because imagine if you get all the way through the interview process and then at the final hurdle they say, we don't have your A level grades, what are they? Or worse, you lie, and then they ask for evidence of the certificates. Um, you've then wasted everyone's time, most importantly, your own time, right? So um, I would probably recommend honesty and transparency above everything else. Um, but there will become a point in time in a few years' time when those aren't as relevant for sure. Or your GCSEs are already very non-relevant in the context of a graduate job hunt.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Thank you. We've had a few people asking about like how much they should tailor their CV. People kind of saying, like I'm applying for a lot of roles. It takes a lot of time to tailor CVs. Do you have any kind of advice on like the amount that you should be tailoring your CV per role? Should kind of like everything that's on the job description be in the CV, or can you just pick, like a few things to mention?
So two things, I think. One is let's go back to the very first piece of advice we talked about today, which is being selective. Okay, so if you find yourself thinking, I'm applying for so many roles, I can't tailor my CV for all of these roles, chances are you're applying for too many roles. Okay, so that's the first thing to think about. Strip it back and ask yourself, if you can't be bothered to apply, to tailor your CV, do you want this role enough? Yeah, so that's a good way, a good self filter to be efficient here. And then the other thing to think about would be if you are tailoring the CV, no, not every single element of the job advert needs to be in the CV. And I'd probably argue if every single thing is, it may look a little bit over contrived and a little bit over the top. But making sure we've covered off the key components is a really good one.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions before we move on now. We've had quite a few questions come through about personal statements on CVs. I know we obviously showed like a good example personal statement here, but do you have any advice for like how to make a personal statement on a CV really stand out?
Good question. So a personal statement is great if it's done well. A bad personal statement is worse, obviously, and no personal statement is better than a bad personal statement. So the first piece of advice I would say is if you're really struggling, again, that might be the first thing that goes. Okay, your education and your employment experience and your core skills are more important than a poorly written personal statement. So if you're struggling, some people don't some people find the idea of writing about themselves quite uncomfortable and really struggle with that specific angle of a personal statement. And that might be what you're personally struggling with. And so if you're really not comfortable that you've nailed it, that might be the first thing to go.
Yeah.
Um, if you do have a great personal statement, what makes it great? It's short and concise and relevant and non-generic. There's something in there which means that when I've read 10, 50, 100 CVs, I'll remember yours. And I ain't gonna remember them all. Okay. So what is gonna make me remember yours as opposed to everyone else's? That's got to be something personal. That's got to be different words to the generic adjectives and skills that everyone is going to say: team player, communication skills, problem solving, organizational. Those will appear on every CV. All right. So um, I've got the skills section for that. I've got the employment history for that. What is going to make yours stand out is something more personal and different.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think just a final question to kind of wrap things up. We've had a really nice question come in, which says, "What makes you want to keep reading a CV?"
Oh, good question. Firstly, I guess it's easy to read, right? Short and concise sentences, bullet points like we've talked about. Um, TikTok world, right, which is short reels and snappy stuff, exists in the business world too, right? Which is like anything too long, people won't read it. So to get your CV read, the more concise it is, the better. Um, and I think people feel the need to cram every single thing that they've ever done in there, but actually being concise and effective with your formatting and the wording is what's going to keep me reading it. Um, and yeah, again, someone who was, you can tell someone who's put time and effort into an application, both based on the tone of voice and the grammar and spelling, but also the relevance and the tailoring as well. So when I see that, that makes me want to read on. But I would say more important to that is the actual formatting and the structure and the conciseness.
Yeah. Having something that's really easy to digest shows that the person's also really good at being concise and things like that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's really great advice. Perfect. I think that's all we've got time for on this section. So yeah, we'll move on to the next section now. We've still got tons and tons of questions. So myself and Megan, who's on this call, are kind of going through on the side and answering as many as we can to try to get through as many as possible. So yeah, thank you for all of your questions so far.
Great. Right, so on to the final section of the workshop, where we move on to interviews. So, what type of interview do you feel most nervous about? Question for you into the chat. I'll just let some answers come up. Is it a assessment center? Is it final round interview with someone super senior? Is it that first interview that you have with maybe a screening call or HR that is just the first one getting your foot in the door? What is it that you find most nervous? Lots of different answers. So some people saying those final rounds, some people finding online much more difficult. Some people finding telephone interviews where you can't see the other person much more difficult. Some people finding assessment centers the most difficult. Yeah, lots of different examples coming up. Perfect. Thanks everyone for sharing those. So hopefully in 40 minutes time, you're going to feel a little bit more prepared and a little bit less nervous for those interviews. So the first thing to think about is that there being a difference between a virtual interview and a face-to-face interview. Okay, so I want you to think about setting yourself up for success no matter what the context is. So, firstly, from an environmental perspective, if you've got a virtual interview, let's make sure that you are in a quiet, distraction free environment with good internet connection. You would be surprised how many interviews I do where people are in an environment where they are clearly not set up for success in the first place. Okay. And I can tell within 10 seconds because they're in a cafe, they are trying to do the interview from a room that other family members are also in. They've got the doorbell going on. They've got a dog barking in the background. They've got the postman arriving. All of those things that are just distractions that mean that you're not 100% present for the interview. So let's make sure you can find a quiet, distraction-free environment that is going to set you up for success. Versus in a face-to-face environment, the thing you've got to remember there is obviously not your own personal environment because you're in the building. But remember that you are being assessed from the moment you arrive in that building. Okay, so the interview does not start when you walk into the interview room. The interview starts when you arrive in the building, right? They might be thinking about how you meet reception, or your body language while you're waiting, or how your communication skills when you're speaking to colleagues who walk past. All of those things are reasons why you might get rejected, right? If you're rude to the receptionist, or if if you're rude to people walking past, or your body language, etc., doesn't demonstrate someone who's a strong communicator, those could all be reasons why you might be rejected. So remember that that challenge and hurdle does not exist in a virtual interview, but that's something specific to a face-to-face setup. When it comes to rapport building, so for virtual interviews, make sure that you're obviously focusing on your screen and making eye contact as much as possible. It can be really easy, especially if you've got two screens, to focus on looking away from the camera. So remember to be looking at the camera as much as possible. But your main body language is going to be shoulders up. In a face-to-face interview, you've got your full body to go with. Okay, so that is really important that you think about your overall body language, how you're sitting, where your hands are, not fidgeting, all of that information, all of that body language that again forms part of your communication, how you're communicating to an interviewer. And then lastly, when it comes to preparation, so in advance, making sure that on a virtual interview, you have joined the link in advance, you've got the correct one, you've checked that your laptop is working effectively, the sound quality is okay, if you're using headphones, that they're working okay, notifications are turned off, emails, etc., so that you're not getting distractions. And if you're in a face-to-face interview, making sure that you've prepared the route in advance, added some buffer time for arrival, and making sure that you understand what the dress code is, that you're dressed appropriately as well. The other difference, I guess, in terms of type of interview is the difference between a behavioral interview and a competency interview. And depending on what the interview is designed to do, they will be assessing different things. It's important you understand what the interview is that you are participating in, so that you can tailor your answers to that type of interview. Okay, so a behavioral interview is evaluating who you are, your communication style, your teamwork skills, your problem solving skills, your soft skills. And a competency interview is assessing, more focused on how well you can do the role based on your skill set and current experience. Okay, so know what the interviewer is looking for so that you can prepare relevant examples and answer the questions at hand. So yeah, make sure that you've understood that in advance. You've read the instructions from the interview. You asked for clarity on what you should be preparing, how you should be preparing, etc. as well. And then the last type of interview is, the difference between a single interview format, a panel interview, and an assessment center. Okay, so that's kind of the actual interview format that you might be encountering. So if you've got a one-on-one interview, then let's make sure that we're researching the interviewer, the role, and your working relationship with them, right? So who is this person, and how will I work with them in the future, so that you can tailor your answers based on the sort of information that they would like to know. Okay, so an interview with the hiring manager for a role is going to be very different to an interview with HR. Okay, because HR does not have the same technical understanding of the role as the hiring manager. And so you going into lots of technical depth about a role or a subject matter to HR will not make as much sense as saving that technical knowledge for the hiring manager interview. So you make sure you can tailor your answers and also prepare relevant questions as well. So, for example, would I ask HR what a day in the life of this role would involve? No. Instead, I might ask HR information about the company culture, or what's great to what people in this role have gone on to do in the past within the organization. Ultimately, they're a great opportunity to showcase your personality, build rapport with someone that you're going to be working really closely with, and find out information about the role. versus a panel interview. So this is where you might be interviewing interviewed by multiple people. So let's make sure you know everyone on the panel and you know all of their roles. So you've done that research in advance. And make sure that your body language is engaging and addressing everyone, both in terms of where you're looking and eye contact, how you're sitting and positioning yourself in the room, and then also the sorts of questions that you're asking to the panel. Okay, so if you have a broad panel, one who is relevant to the role, one who is not relevant to the role, making sure that the questions you ask at the end of the interview suit that audience and cater to the fact that you've got people who are both role specific and non-role specific as well. And that panel interview for your benefit, it's a great opportunity to meet more of the team, learn more about the company culture, and ultimately to impress a number of potential future colleagues. So it's going to really help you in landing that first impression and getting to understand what the organization is going to be like. And then the other final kind of difference in terms of the type of interview that you might encounter is an assessment center. So this is where you will be one of many students and or graduates attending the day. So your goal here is to stand out, right? It's really important that at the end of the day, the interviewers, the assessment center assessors remember who you are, taking into account that there could have been 20, 30, 40 people at that assessment center. It is completely normal to feel nervous in this environment, right? And to encounter imposter syndrome or nerves before an assessment center. And what you've got to remember is, in fact, probably everyone is encountering imposter syndrome and nerves in that context. Okay, so that's the first thing to remember. It might not look like it. Some people might come across really confident in that environment, but that just might be their way of dealing with those nerves. And your way of dealing with those nerves might be different. And that is okay. So a few things to think about that can help you before and during an assessment center really nail it and feel comfortable in your own skin. So firstly, before the assessment center, and this is something you can do before any interview, is just start your day by something that makes you feel good. Whether that is some yoga to clear your mind, whether that is watching one of your favorite comedy or TV shows that's just going to make you laugh for 30 minutes to start the day, whether that's catching up with a friend, giving them a phone call to put you in a good mood, whether that is going for a run or going for a fitness class to clear your head. There's loads of different things that can put you in a good headspace to start the day before you've even thought about going to that interview. The next step is have a plan for when you arrive, right? So you might know you're going to an assessment center and you might know that you're going to meet a load of people and going to find that really tricky to kind of make small talk with people. So come up with some small talk questions, okay, that you can have ready in your back pocket for that moment. Understand and acknowledge how you respond to nerves. So when I'm nervous, I get really overly chatty and talk really quickly. And I know that about myself, okay? So I know in an environment where communication really matters, I need to take a moment, take a breath, slow down, and slow my communication down. Other people might shy away. And in that scenario, if you can recognize in yourself that when you are nervous, you're more shy, then let's think about, right, how can I push myself? How can I prepare myself to come a little bit outside of my comfort zone, knowing that I will stand a better chance of getting this role if I'm less nervous. And then remember that everyone else is just as nervous as you. It might not look like it, it might not feel like it, but it is the case. So think about when you leave, how do you want to be remembered? That is what you can go in thinking about. How do I want to be remembered? And that's the kind of message that you want to land for the day. A few common interview mistakes to think about. So firstly, being organized, make sure that you plan your journey, leave lots of time for travel delays, especially if you're coming to London for the first time or going to a city that you haven't been to for the first time or spent a lot of time in. Make sure that you're adding in that buffer for interview travel. Researching the location in advance, and pack everything you need, so water, notebook, pen, ID, etc., so that you don't get to the location and then realize that you don't have something you need. Preparing thoroughly, that might be researching the company, what they do, who your interviewer is, a bit about their career history. Preparing how you can tailor your answers. And then prepare for unexpected questions as well. So be open to thinking on the spot. Okay. It is really important that you expect the unexpected. And if that comes up, you always need to give those questions a go. Okay. Saying I don't have an answer to that, haven't prepared an answer to that, I don't know. That's the worst thing you can do. I'd rather you give a bad answer than simply say that you haven't prepared. Because what I'm looking for is the ability to think on the spot. And then the last thing think about is how you can build rapport. So remember, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. So body language, eye contact, active listening. A big one in interviews where people go wrong is talking over the interviewer, interrupting or jumping in to give your response because you're really keen to. But actually that can demonstrate poor communication skills and poor active listening. And remember, how you interact with everyone during the process matters. So that is everyone from the very first person that you meet at reception to the last person you see on the way out. And then the last section, to wrap things up, we're going to look at some questions to ask at the end of the interview. So, one for you before we start, but can you give me an example in the chat of a good question that you might want to ask at the end of an interview? And just take a second for some of those answers to come in. What's the most rewarding thing about your job? Love that one. What does the success look like in the role in 3 months' time? Another great one. What does the best candidate look like in this role? Another great one. What's the community and culture in the organization like? A great one. Fab. So some great examples of questions come in there as well. There were a few questions which we'll come to, which I would encourage not to ask. Okay, so I really want everyone to pay attention for this section as we go through, because there are a few examples here of questions that I would suggest steering away from, unless in a certain context. Okay, so this is really about reading the room and understanding who you're speaking to and what is appropriate to ask at what point in the process. So. Questions to ask. Ultimately, questions that tell you more about the role you're applying for. So the more information you know, the more you can determine if it's the right role for you. So back to what we talked about right at the start of the session, an hour and a half ago, being selective, right? These questions will help you understand, is this role for me? What would a typical day look like in this role? What skill is most important to have to succeed in this role? What would success look like in the role after the first 3 to 6 months? So these would be great questions to ask the hiring manager or someone who is within that team. Would I ask HR, what would a typical day look like in this role? No, because they wouldn't be the best person to ask. And asking that might demonstrate you're asking a question for the sake of asking a question, as opposed to because you understand the question and you want to know the answer. Okay, so think about that one. It's the context here is always really important. Likewise, if I were to ask questions that tell you more about the company, why do you like working here? What's been the highlight of working at X company? What type of people do you best at Y company? Those are questions you could probably ask anyone. in an interview process, whether that be HR, whether that be a hiring manager, whether that be just a colleague you're introduced to during the interview process. There's nothing specific about those questions that mean you should or shouldn't ask it to anyone. And they're great questions to have in your back pocket that if someone catches you off guard and says, "Do you have any questions?" you can ask so that you never say, "No, I don't have any questions." Okay? Always, always, always have a question. And if you don't have a question, that's your sign again. How much do you want this role? Because I want to know everything about it. Okay? Um, Questions not to ask. So, a question that shows I haven't researched the company properly. So, for example, questions where I can get that information online. For example, the date the company was founded, or the CEO's name, or where the company has other offices. Okay, all of those are factual questions that I could find that information online and just demonstrates I haven't done my research. It would be totally fine to say, hey, I read something online about you having offices in a different location, but I couldn't see, having research, I couldn't see where those other locations were. Could you tell me more about where those other offices are? That would be fine, right? If you genuinely have done that research, but you can't find the information, that's okay. But if the information is easily available online, you shouldn't be asking it. And then questions for that ultimately are better positioned for an HR team or for kind of interview documentation that you might receive through either the job advert or the hiring process. So things about benefits like annual leave, working hours, salary brackets, etc. Those are questions for an HR person, which are logistical questions about the role and the offer package. And if I get to an interview with a hiring manager and they want to see genuine passion and enthusiasm for the role, and the only question I have is, what are the working hours? Does that demonstrate enthusiasm for the role? No. Right. So remember, you are being assessed from the moment you walk into that building to the moment you leave, including the questions that you ask. That is an assessment in itself. Okay. So we need to make sure that we understand why you're asking certain questions and who you're asking them to, and making sure that you're asking them in the correct context, format, and audience as well. So, before we wrap up, I'm just going to hand over to Ella now, to talk through a couple of upcoming events.
Yes, we will go back into Q&A shortly, but just before we do so, just wanted to let you guys know about some of our upcoming events that are happening this September. So yeah, it would be great to see you at some of our events. We've got four coming up in the first week or so of September. So if you scan that QR code, it will take you to our events page where you can check out other events that we kind of have going on at Bright Network at the moment. Our events are a really great way to kind of connect with the employers that you may want to be working at. Find out more about the types of roles that you could be doing, learn new skills, build your network and stuff like that. So yeah, it would be great to see you at our events this September. I think we have one more slide as well, Ali, just to specifically shout out Festival, which is our biggest event of the year, which will be happening on the 11th of September. It's the UK's number one student careers event. There will be over 80 employers in attendance across 9 different industries. So it really gives you the opportunity to have that rare opportunity to speak to employers face to face about what they're looking for when it comes to applications, the sorts of candidates that they're really keen to meet. And yeah, you can really kind of get your foot in the door with those employers. So as this is an application ready webinar, if you are really looking to kind of stand out in applications and get through to, the interview process and to secure a role, I would highly, highly recommend coming along to Festival. So if you scan that QR code on the screen, it will also take you through to the Festival page where you can submit your application as well. Great. And now that we have done that, we've got about 20 minutes for some questions, and we still have loads coming in, Ali. So I'll try to get through as many as possible. Um, so that we can kind of, yeah, answer as many questions as we possibly have. We've got quite a few questions to do with like how much research you should do for a company. Is there kind of like a limit on the research that you should do where it kind of gets to be too much? Similarly to that, lots of questions around like the amount of research you should do into who's interviewing you as well.
Good question. So yeah, on a company itself, I think there are ways that you can really um, like quickly cover off the kind of key bases. And yes, of course, you need it. You need to be realistic to the amount of time that you're putting into it. Further through the interview process correlates to the more preparation you should be doing. Okay, so for a application, I wouldn't be expecting you to be doing the same level of research as for a final round interview. But if it's for a final round interview that you genuinely really want, you should be prepared to put hours worth of research into that role. So things to look at: the company website, specifically, I guess the careers website. So they may brand that as like a kind of careers or jobs at or whatever it might be. So that's something to look at. LinkedIn and any posts that the company may have posted recently, which may cover off news, blogs, etc. And then if it's a well-known company, the news as well, any key things that have happened in the news recently, in particular, if that you're looking at kind of law firms or financial institutions, that are often in the news, it's worth kind of keeping a trend abreast of any trends or kind of big market changes that may be happening there. And then on the individual, LinkedIn is fine. Having a quick look at their LinkedIn, understand what their role is, how long they've worked at the organization, and if relevant, where they were before that role. That would be all I'd expect you to understand.
Great. Yeah, that's really, really useful. We've had quite a few questions to do with assessment centres, how to kind of stand out during like the group part of assessment centres without being too like overpowering. I don't know if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, good question. So I always think of this as like a dance floor analogy. So you want an assessment center to be like a great dance floor. And to have a great dance floor, you need to recognize there are going to be some people who are great dancers and really comfortable dancing and love dancing. And there are going to be some people who do not like dancing at all and are going to shy away from every possibility to dance. But to have the best dance floor possible, you need everyone to be dancing. Okay. So you want to recognize in yourself if I am the sort of person that naturally might jump onto the dance floor straight away. I want to make sure that I'm making space for other people. And likewise, I want you to recognize if you are the sort of person that would naturally shy away and be at the side of the dance floor in the corner with your friends, that you might need to push yourself a little bit further and get into that dance floor yourself, unprompted, and push yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone. And I think it's really important that both parties reflect on the overall dynamics because whoever asked this question, it's a great question. You don't want to come across as overbearing. Okay, so answering the most questions or being the loudest in the room is not a one-way ticket to getting hired. Those could be reasons why you may get rejected instead. Okay, so being able to demonstrate you understand team dynamics and interpersonal skills and empathy and the ability to communicate effectively with others, that will all come across, not just in questions that you answer in a assessment center, but in how you behave as well. So I would love to see you all really thinking of that kind of dance floor analogy and how can I actually make space for other people here and how can I make sure that I push myself outside my comfort zone a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's great. I love the dance floor analogy. That's a great one. Perfect. We have actually had a few questions come in as well about any advice for neurodivergent students when it comes to preparing for like interviews and assessment centers. A few just around any general advice, but also advice around telling employers or interviewers that you may need like additional support because you're neurodivergent.
Yeah, of course. So, increasingly, and this is obviously good news, more and more employers are explicitly putting upfront in their job adverts or interview communications requests for reasonable adjustments. And so, hopefully, in the majority of cases, you will receive at some point in the interview process notification of what to do to declare kind of any need for reasonable adjustments, basically. So that might be more time for an assessment task. It might be just a quiet space during an assessment centre day that you have available to you at some point to kind of remove yourself from a busy space. So whatever those reasonable adjustments are, in the majority of cases, you will just get notified how to request those and kind of notify someone of those. And that might not be immediately, and that's fine. Don't panic. That will probably come up if you get to a assessment day or a task, and you feel like there is something that the company could do, and you haven't yet had that prompt for those reasonable adjustments. A simple and polite request is absolutely fine. Where I think sometimes these requests go wrong is where someone kind of over explains or feels the need to kind of get maybe a little bit defensive that they haven't yet been asked. But a polite request is always absolutely welcome and demonstrates effective business communication, and it is absolutely totally welcome and fine. Always assume that a business will want to get the best out of you and not that they're ever trying to trip you up.
Yeah, no, that's some really great advice. Thanks, Ali. We've had a few kind of questions around. I know you spoke about, you're kind of being not judged, but you're being kind of looked at as soon as you walk into the room or the building of the place that you're being interviewed at. Do you have any advice when it comes to like how to make a good impression? And we've also had a few questions on like how early should you be arriving for interviews and things like that.
Yeah, good question. So punctuality is important. I would say do not arrive more than 15 minutes in advance, um, and do not arrive less than 5 minutes in advance. So try and get that 10 to 15 minute buffer. Um, if that is the case, and you arrive super early, like quite frankly, just wait outside, do a lap of the building, scout out the desk. But I've had people arrive like honestly like 40 minutes early before an hour early, and like I'm not ready for you. So you're just gonna sit awkwardly, and that's gonna make me feel awkward as well. So scout out the site, right? I know where the front door is. I'm going to do a lap. I'm going to get myself a coffee, etc. That's the correct thing to do there. But I wouldn't go into the office more than 15 minutes beforehand. And what was sorry, the second part of that question was
Any tips on just like making a good impression as soon as you enter the building?
yes. So I've got a funny story on this one, and then I'll give some kind of other advice as well. So very early on in my career, I worked as a consultant, recruitment consultant for a graduate recruitment agency, and I had interviewed a candidate, and she had said to me that she had received the advice to always wear something um, colourful um, when you go for an interview that makes you stand out, and that she was going to wear this pair of like red shoes, black suit, etc. But she had these like bright red shoes on because she'd received that advice and she wanted to stand out and she wanted to be memorable. And so she told me this story, and then she went to the interview, and then um, because you've got to remember that at the end of the day, if the interviewer has interviewed lots of different people, they might not remember all of your names, but they might remember you as the girl in the red shoes, or the guy in the purple tie, or the person with X hair clip or whatever it might be. So something colourful that makes you stand out. And then when I debriefed with the company, the interviewer he referred to her as the girl with the red shoes, and she ended up getting that job. And so kind of just I like it as an anecdote in itself that what you've got to think about in terms of standing out, it's not the only way you're going to stand out, but it is always useful to have something about you that just makes you, when a business is going to have interviewed 10, 15, however many people, what's one thing that they can reference you by that isn't your name, because they ain't going to remember your name. But then the other thing that really, on a more pragmatic level, what you can do to stand out is that rapport building on the day, and really building a personal relationship with those interviewers. And I think back to my graduate scheme assessment centre, and I found out loads of interesting facts about the interviewers in the kind of networking time. One of them was born in the same village as my mum, in same remote village in Scotland as my mum. One of them went to the same school as me, etc. So, and all of that was just stuff that was going to help me bond with them, and yeah, build that rapport ultimately, so they remember who you are.
Nice. Yeah, that's some really good advice. Wear red shoes to interviews is what I'm hearing now. That's great. We've got 10 minutes left, so some time for some more questions. We've had a few related to like what advice you would give to students or graduates who are looking for internships and graduate roles in a sector that's different from the degree that they've studied in. So people saying they may not have relevant experience because maybe it's not related to their degree or any previous experience that they've had. So how would they go about kind of expressing their interest and showing their passion for, I guess, the different sector that they're looking to move into?
Yeah, good question. So there are loads of ways that you can express passion that don't demonstrate that, sorry, that aren't related to like a degree subject or a industry or like work experience. So that could be like volunteering for a charity, for example. So it could be a cause that so the that you've contributed to, or a society that you've worked at as being part of at university. It could be extracurricular educational content that you've kind of undertaken, so podcasts that you subscribe to, or webinars that you've been to, or books that you've read, and non-fiction books that you've read, to further educate you on a subject matter. So it might be a financial podcast that you subscribe to continuously educate yourself about finance terminology, and industry knowledge in preparation for securing a role in the finance industry, acknowledging you don't yet have any work experience in the finance industry, but everyone who works in the finance industry currently, at some point in time, they did not have work experience in the finance industry, right? Everyone. So just because you don't have work experience in that industry does not mean that you can't get into that industry.
Yeah, yeah, that's some really great advice. There's lots of things you can do outside of your degree to express an interest in a particular area. We obviously have spoken about what to ask and what not to ask at the end of interviews and like how to kind of leave a good impression with the questions that you ask. But do you like have any advice when it comes to like the amount of questions that people should ask? When does it get too much? When does it ever feel like, people are just asking questions for the sake of asking questions? Yeah, do you have a kind of like ideal number of questions that people should ask in an interview?
Yeah, great question, actually. And look, this is where I will remind you that yes, you're asking the question, and yes, the purpose of this is for you to find out more information, but you're still being assessed. Okay, so remember that you asking questions is assessing two things. One, your ability to read the room and contextualize information and communicate effectively. And two, your genuine interest and enthusiasm about the role. Okay, so if you don't ask any questions, or if you ask one really boring question, that to me doesn't demonstrate that you're particularly interested in the role. Whereas if you ask a couple of questions that really make you demonstrate commercial acumen or demonstrate some research that you've done, those are great questions that demonstrate that you're really interested in this role. Okay, so remember first and foremost that although you are genuinely being asked if you have any questions. You're also being assessed because this is part of the interview window. Okay. So um, what I wouldn't do is prepare a list of questions and ask every single question no matter what. Okay, so there are various factors. One might simply be the time. Okay, if you see that the interview is scheduled to finish in 2 minutes, then you've only got 2 minutes to ask your questions. Okay, so be selective about which question you're asking because you may only get one question in. So reading the room is really important and prioritizing is really important. And yeah, definitely not asking lots and lots and lots of questions. Two to three is I would say, ideal and good. Sometimes naturally a good kind of conversation sparks up and a kind of debate around those questions sparks up, and that's great if the conversation kind of flows naturally. But yeah, try and avoid just listing off, hey, I've prepared loads and here they all are, because it doesn't look natural. It doesn't demonstrate genuine enthusiasm. It demonstrates I've prepared load and I'm going to read them off and you're going to answer them no matter what the time is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's some really great advice. I think there's definitely a sweet spot there between asking too much and not enough. Great. I think you kind of spoke about this a little bit during the presentation, but someone has asked, how can you answer a question that you have not prepared for? How can you kind of get a bit more time or manage your nerves when you're kind of stuck and unsure of what exactly to answer to a question you may not have been expecting?
Yeah, good question. Like this one is a question I was not expecting. So, firstly, never feel like you can't just say, that's not a question I'd thought about. Let me just pause and take a moment to think about that one. Perfectly logical first response, right? What the interviewer is looking for there is how you um approach unfamiliar questions and problem solve rather than do you know the answer. So if it is more of a like problem solving question um that you haven't thought of, then talk them through your thought process. So, for example, the question might be, in particular, if you're interviewing for one of those kind of like management consulting case study style roles, they might say like, you sometimes get those curveball questions, which are like, how many ping pong balls can you fit in a London bus? Right. So I don't know the answer, right? And instead of saying I just don't know the answer, all they want to see is some form of logic. Okay. So you would say, right, well, I have no idea what the answer to that is, but let me talk you through how I would approach solving that problem. I would estimate that a London bus is X length by X width by X height. I would estimate that one ping pong ball is X diameter, and therefore, if I do some quick maths, that would mean a total of 10,000 ping pong balls. Take away 10% for the space of, the space that's occupied by seats, etc. That would be my guess. It may be way off, but what it demonstrated was some logical thought process to problem solving spontaneously. So I would rather understand there's logical thought process and be way off than not give that answer a go at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's some really good advice. If you can kind of show your thinking around your answer, it's definitely better than just kind of saying you don't know how to answer it. Perfect. I think we've probably got time for one more question. So I've seen this question come up a few times as well, around advice about kind of like personality assessments that a lot of like companies do at the beginning of graduate scheme kind of applications and stuff like that. So they've basically said, for example, the ones that ask questions such as like ranking the ways you'd respond to a situation or choosing which personality traits you think describe yourself. Yeah, do you have any advice around those sorts of assessments?
Um, I think so. My advice generally would be, look, you can easily over engineer and overthink those answers. And if I would rather get rejected for a role that I wasn't right for than get a role trying to be someone I'm not, and then I'm in the role and I'm not that person. So if the if the company says, right, do you prefer X environment or Y environment, and you think the answer is Y environment, but you prefer X environment, if you go with the I'm going to try and please the company, then A, you may end up in a role which is not right for you, and B, you may actually just trip yourself up and get the answers wrong based on being trying to double bluff things and guess things rather than actually the genuine answers. So if you have any of those scenarios, I would always go for I'm going to go for what I think the answer is, as opposed to trying to please what the business is wanting here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always better to go for like what you actually think and feel because at the end of the day, you're the person that's going to be in the role, not the ideal person that you kind of have that you think that they want. So no, that's really good advice. And that actually brings us exactly to time. So we have timed that perfectly. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We hope that you found it super useful. I've seen lots of questions surrounding the recording and stuff like that. We will be sending out a recording after this, so please just keep an eye on your email. You'll receive that from me at some point today. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thank you so much for attending. We've also got lots of content on our website that can help with applications, interviews, and things like that. So I'll make sure to include some links to some of those in the email that goes out as well. But just wanted to say a huge thank you to Ali for today, for sharing all of your words of wisdom when it comes to applications. So yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
No problem
Thank
at
you,
all. Thanks so
everyone.
much, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.